to propose legislation for what we call small claims court. There are lots of poor people, to an example you just gave, that they have issues with others and sometimes with large firms, but the lawyer fee is greater than the fee you're claiming.
It is their right.
Yes.
The right that someone has. All of our rights exist in context.
What is the context for second medical opinion?
Because of disrespecting the process.
No.
Jesus, this is common sense, man.
Any situation which you seem to do, you're just dealing with Afro-Guyanese issues.
Hello there, wherever you are. Pleasant good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Wherever you are, you're looking at the Freddie Kissoon Show. We're coming to you from the home of our guest in Ogle. Highway, we call the Atlantic Highway. That's the first highway going up the East Coast. Our guest this evening needs no introduction. He's been around a long time in Guyana as a literary personality, as a political personality, and maybe six-time guest on this program. We would like to talk to him tonight about things that everybody wants to talk about because there's so much that is going on in Guyana. Our guest this evening is Guyana Prize winner, and his current status is the advisor to the One Guyana Commission. Ruel, thanks for being with us once again. There's so much going on here. Yeah. I know you work with Dr. Rupert Roopnaraine at the Ministry of Education. He died. Yeah. There is this thing that is going on Facebook with Ganesh Mahipal and PNC leaders that they think it's a mockery, insult for a Hindu politician when it's Ramadan. They gone and mix with the Muslim. They think, that is opportunism. Leonard replied, and him and I were discussing it. Yeah. And we said, look, if a Hindu guy is a leader of the country, by logic, he's supposed to show respect to a Ramadan event. Other things that are coming up that we want to talk about. What about One Guyana Commission? What it hopes to achieve? What is likely to happen after the first 2-3 years of One Guyana Commission? Because I think everybody in this country and in the diaspora has hopes. Everybody has hopes. People have hopes of this thing, this Indian African thing. We've got our money, we've got a good economy, the future looks good. Guyana doesn't resemble the 1970 anymore. It's two different countries. Yeah. And we want this thing to, we want to see a One Guyana. Yeah. What have you been doing with One Guyana Commission?
So, I'm sort of, ethically bound from speaking too much in it, and this really is the president's purview. But I will say this: you're right in the sense that the president's purpose, and he's sort of dropped these a bit more than breadcrumbs along the way with regard to the purpose of unification, particularly at this time. And you touched upon the issue of leadership and religion, and the intersect of whether a Hindu person can go into a Muslim place of worship during Ramadan, etc., and vice versa. Some issues that we've been struggling, you know, since independence, in terms of having a conversation on culture, or cultural divisions, or socio-political divisions, and the purpose of where we're going to go in 2 or 3 years. The reality is that established properly, the work of any such commission will naturally extend beyond the life of the current political cycle, the 5-year cycle. So it's a long-term process. It has to do with looking at issues of equity, social cohesion, a sense of fairness. Guyanese must feel equal in citizenship, and so the divisions that we have will not. The sort of petty squabbling that you've just referred to. So we tackle them. We tackle those issues frontally, so they can't be exploited. Which, in the sense that they're being exploited now.
The One Guyana Commission, will it outstrip or will it render the ERC irrelevant?
Again, I won't speak to that, but I don't get a sense that it will replace anything, except it should be complementary to the work of the ERC. The work of the ERC as a constitutional commission has its specific mandate. It's ethnic relations. Certainly, the president is the constitutional guardian of the constitution. There won't be any entity that simply replaces or undermines or clashes with a set constitutional commission.
All right, it has not been fully integrated in society yet. That's because, apart from you being advisor to the commission, the commissioners have not been identified and sworn in as yet.
Well, I would say this: I can't speak for the president on this. This sort of pronouncement would be his particular purview. I could only speak to the general broad intent. Any specifics would have to come from him.
Or
whenever he's.
Or when the commission is fully legally embodied, then it will have a CEO, and that person can speak in it, right?
I suspect there will be a consultative process beforehand.
What, as a young man who have entered politics, you contested the 2020 election in your own political party, Citizen Initiative, plus you've been writing, then you were in the Ministry of Education with Dr. Roopnaraine. You think this thing that has plagued us since emancipation and the end of indentureship, you think this thing has an ending?
I think it has a positive evolution before us. I mean, what we've seen, or we're continuing to see globally at this point in time, is, and something that I've warned about, in that you have this sort of global division along, primarily at the root of it is cultural lines. There's some political elements of it. There's certainly some economic interplay. But I firmly believe that Guyana, concept of one Guyana, I think that will be an ongoing lesson on unification, on living together for the rest of the world. So I think it's going to be more relevant. I think there are going to be attempts, of course, by various players to sort of pull us together, or pull us apart, sorry. So it will never end per se, but it will be mitigated. We lived with pathogens within us. I mean, you get cold, the cold doesn't really go away. But you learn to suppress it with good medicine and a correct environment and healthy practices, so it doesn't overtake your immune system. And I think that's what we need to aim for. You can't eradicate ethnic or any sort of internecine conflict, but we can mitigate it to the point wherein we are a functional whole body of people.
I want your analytical. I want your analytical take on this because it's my area. I have to look at these people, read what they say, write about it. So what I write could be out there for people to read. There was a stark, absorbing result of the last election. That election took place 5 years after the 2020 election. And in those 5 years, I have been monitoring the Wickford Burkes, the Mark Benchop, but particularly David Hines. And I am wondering if One Guyana Commission may not be the final solution to these people's mischief. Because when you think of Hines 4 or 5 times a week since 2020, and this guy's been banging away, constant banging. And people associated with his party, the WPA, people associated with the PNC, just left and went over to win.
Yes.
And the result was from 31 seats to 12. Now the analysis has to factor in the failure of Hines et al.
Yeah, but you see, it goes to what I spoke about. I mean, pathogens will always remain in the body politic. You can't get rid of them. But eventually, an evolving system, a healthy system, will mitigate them. And so, I mean, you take some tablets, and when you get a flu, and after a while, take some vitamin C, and after a while, the pathogens that cause the flu, the sneezing, etc., they go down in your system, and you're healthy again. I think we're going towards that, and we've to that health, and we've seen there's been a lot of activity, there's a lot of furious activity, particularly post 2020. And what has happened is that our body, our socio-political, socio-economic, socio-cultural body has rejected that activity to a stark degree. And so you've seen the impact of it in two ways. One, you've seen growth in some positive campaign from the incumbent government, but you've also seen people, as you notice, people running from that sort of toxic messaging to something that is not necessarily healthy, but they've seen it as an option to that sort of toxicity. So I think you see in asking the question and asking us, I think you've sort of answered it in yourself. There has been less currency for that sort of thing, and you have another litmus test coming up soon that can be used for diagnosis. Is the local government elections scheduled for sometime later this year, and my bet is that you're going to see even further reduction of that sort of pathogenic behavior.
I don't follow the traditional rules of many things in life, right?
That's true.
For example, when I did a election series of program with Ignite Television, I was not happy with, you have to take a break before a late guest to come in. In this show that I run, when a guest is late, while the camera is on, they come in.
Yeah, of course.
I have had my dog on the show. I've had my pet. So I happen to have an obsession with animals. And I see you have two very nice kittens / cats here.
Yeah, yeah.
You think you can encourage them to come here
Sure.
while we
Yeah, but
I know they will jump off,
they're very cat-like.
but
so-
I'd like the guests to see them because they're very cute.
yeah, they're
One,
very cat-like. So you have
could
to-
you call them
Bagheera?
Bagheera from
RJ,
the
come.
movie, from the movie Jungle Book?
Yeah. So I read the book when it was thing. But let me get them. Let me get her, at least. Come, RG.
Good. We broke with tradition.
Yeah.
This is our. We have 4 guests on the
Yeah.
program.
So these are my two.
Your 2 babies. I have 5. 2 dogs, 3 cats, and I feed 7-yard cats.
Yeah. So
And I think this is the beauty of nature.
yeah. So this is RJ. He's the calmer one.
RJ,
For the most part.
RJ, you behaving yourself?
Yeah.
Oh God,
And it's-
Bagheera gone.
Yeah. But she's usually calmer. But
Bagheera gone. RJ, you gonna go up to be a sweet boy? I think he
yeah.
wants to go. He wants to go after his sister.
no, he'll stay. He'll stay.
He wants to go after his sister. No, he wants
see.
to go.
Let me
Don't
see.
he? RJ's gone.
I just want to explore.
Well, look, RJ is sitting on the table. So
Yeah.
that is breaking with tradition. I see nothing wrong with that.
Oh,
People tell me why we don't have coffee cup drinking from a bottle.
Yeah, that's
I said, look, if the North American and Europeans decide to have a talk show with bottled water, we can adopt it. I mean, why we adopt? What is wrong with the guest having his 2 cats? And we should, anyway. After that, I want to say light moment, but absorbing moment. Let's go to Rupert Roopnaraine.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I
The one of the world's most prestigious journal, Review of African Political Economy,
yes.
has done an analysis of him since his death, and I find they were equally balanced. They asked the question: should we judge a person by the earlier ethereal contribution, career, or shall we judge them by the last and final disintegration, the fallout, the betrayal?
Yes.
And I think what they did is say they balance it. And I tried to do that in my 5 columns in the Chronicle. A 6 is coming up. So you worked with him.
Yeah.
You want to do an objective analysis of him?
So I read the article, and I guess particularly because I work with him, I think that the attempted balance and the attempt at that sort of assessment of early life versus later life and what would be perceived as betrayal, etc. I don't think it. First, for it to be fair, it has to be accurate, and I believe that there were inaccuracies in the article that took away from any assessment of the fairness. So I should say, and I think I've said it before. As a young man, the first time I voted for Rupert Roopnaraine. It's WP. I think, I can't remember what the configuration was, but it was Rupert Roopnaraine at the head of the ticket. This is the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. When I went to work in 2015 for APNU AFC, I went to work for Rupert Roopnaraine. It wasn't a case wherein I begged work for government and stuff like that. He said, "Come work with me, so we could work on this cultural thing." I don't think anybody, and I think the article sort of underscores this early activism, etc. So I don't think anybody per se could say that you can take anything from Roopnaraine, 70s, 80s, etc., 90s.
I don't think you can take anything away. On the
Yeah.
contrary,
Yeah.
you can really maximize
Yes.
his contribution
Of
and
course, yeah.
his brilliance.
Yeah. So we go now to
The
the
later years.
The later years, and Roopnaraine was in his 70s, I think, when he became minister, probably early 70s. The trees.
And he became a minister in
So
2015.
so that'll be early 70s.
Right.
By then, I believe he had nothing else to prove, per se. But I think that the role that he played in that in the administration, as he brought to it a credibility and a competence. I mean, he wasn't. I'll say this: he was not a great administrator, but he wasn't there to be that. He was there to be for his, his policy, his policy outlook and his vision. And there was nobody else more qualified than he to do so. The article that you referenced, and I read it, and one of the key things, I mean, when it comes to the accuracy aspect of it, it said that, for example, that he was rewarded with a promotion to the Ministry of the Presidency as Minister of Public Service from Minister of Education.
That wasn't a promotion.
That wasn't a promotion. I mean, logically, functionally, but also, I was there. I knew the events, and I will say, in terms of how we judge him, one of the key criticisms I had of the Grange administration, that it was a gerontocracy. It was it was run by a set of old people, particularly older men, with no intention or vision of a generational transition. Rupert Roopnaraine didn't have that problem. I mean, first of all, he insisted that I work with him, and this is me in my, at the time, mid-30s, as his advisor. Two, whenever it is that he wanted something done directly from him, programmatically, he would refer to a group of younger people who he had trust in. I think retrospectively, a lot of them failed in terms of their politics, etc. But he had Kadaki Amsterdam. He had
Wazir Mohammed.
Wazir, who's not as young, but he's a different generation. Has sort of peripheral person that we refer to. Tabitha Srabahaley is now,
She worked with him in the ministry.
No, they didn't work with him, but remember within that construct. So she actually replaced him eventually when he finally left government. But Roopnaraine, before the no confidence vote, etc., people think he'd offered to resign. And he did, in fact, resign.
In 2017, yeah.
In 2017. And he resigned because, at the time, government, the thing of government was taking a toll on him, physically and mentally. But he didn't decide to hold on and say, I won't give up this position, or I will just, not turn up and treat this as a sinecure job. So he was willing to transfer his knowledge and quite frankly power as well to a different generation. And so a lot of the analysis, I think, in which they frame him as betraying this ethos of the 70s, the spirit of the 70s and the 80s. I think that analysis is taken within the context of what happened in 2018, 2019, but more important, 2020, when there was the attempt to subvert the elections. But by the time he had no thing, he was out. Yeah. He was out, and and we've seen the examples of in governments everywhere, particularly in purportedly greatest country in the world. Leaders hold on to power well into their dotage, and what Roopnaraine did is he left government and went to dote on his new grandchildren at the time. And you would see the occasional picture with him he puts up on WhatsApp, etc. And with him and his grandchildren, his daughter's children, and particularly I think her son at the time. And so he left. For me, he left in a timely manner. He easily could have, but he did not try to lend some false intellectual weight to the corruption and the undermining of democracy that went on. But he didn't do that. So when you have that, and I mean there are other issues as well. I mean, just the ravages of age, etc. He's a brilliant man.
Exceedingly so.
Yeah, and so in terms of a legacy, I mean, I have two things that happened in 2016 that sort of cemented for me not how strong, but how wide Roopnaraine's legacy was. One, in 2016, I went to a UNESCO meeting in Barbados. And when the meeting was over, I stayed back a couple of days to get some research done and to have some meetings with people in Barbados on culture and cultural policy. And one of the people I checked out was, the equally venerable George Lamming. He had an office at UE. And we spoke for about an hour, 2 hours, in fact. And the key highlight for that, I mean, he spoke about everything, culture, politics, etc. But the key highlight for me is when he asked if I knew Rupert Roopnaraine. I was happy to report that, yeah, I work with him. And he said, Rupert Roopnaraine is a genuine world-class intellectual. He's a Guyanese treasure. And so he asked me to communicate that when I went back, which I did. And then about a month or two after that, I was on a writing fellowship at the University of Iowa, which is way deep in Middle America, I was surprised, for example, as I was walking in the library and somebody called out to me and turned out to, incidentally, there's like one Guyanese student there. However, it was an international writing fellowship. People from all over the world. And one of those people was from Cyprus. An elder man called Constantopoulos. And like the very first day we arrived, he was part of the cohort. And he asked me, are you from Guyana? Do you know Rupert Roopnaraine? That's the one. And it turns out that he worked in Guyana at the University of Guyana in the late 70s. He taught in Guyana for 5 years, from around 76 to about 81. And one of his best friends here was Rupert Roopnaraine. This is a poet, intellectual, filmmaker from Cyprus.
I would probably know him. I was a student.
Yeah.
I would have been a student in those days, and because of my student, all the lecturers.
He would have been the one Cypriot person there. I think he taught languages. Languages department. Yeah, but he so this person out of nowhere remembered and had a friendship and had a high regard for Rupert Roopnaraine. And he came to Guyana after like 30 years, because he was in the 80s. And he came back and I think he went up to Mycone at one point and met up with Rupert Roopnaraine. So I say that to say that at the time that Roopnaraine entered government, entered executive power in 2015, it could not be seen as a betrayal of his values, because he had essentially made peace with his political enemies towards what he believes to be a greater good, and what many people at the time believed to be a greater good.
But you sure that is not an obfuscation? I think there are two Roopnaraines, and they should not have been merged. And the merger, I think, has damaged Roopnaraine's credibility and his legacy. If you know Roopnaraine the way I know him, I think he stands out as one of the most brilliant person
Yeah.
in the scholarship of literature.
Of course, yeah, no, yeah.
In as a person, as an intellectual on his own, and in the classroom.
Oh, yeah.
And thirdly, as a person who can speak to an audience and move them. And I think he would have achieved global fame the way Derek Walcott did if he had kept that intellectual genius and penetrated the universities of the world. And then after 5 years, you see the books he had written, the lectures he had given. And Rupert Roopnaraine was so brilliant that he should have confined himself to that Walcott, Naipaul, but he went into West Indian politics.
Yeah.
And
I'll say this. So, one of the books I'm reading now.
The Sky's Wild Noise?
No, I actually read it. I have I left it in my office. But it's a book from the 1700s, by a French writer, it's in translation. Alexis de Tocqueville. It's a very famous book. It's called Democracy in America.
Yeah, that's one of the most famous books.
Yeah.
Well, in the English-speaking world. Right?
Exactly. So, and there's a part of the book in which he says, let me paraphrase, there are people who believe that they can separate themselves and write about the world's problems, and in doing so, achieve this sort of superiority. And there are others who throw themselves into the world's problems. It means politics, and believe that they are pulling the strings. Them are, they're both deceived. And the point he was making is that a public intellectual, once it is that you, it isn't enough to just write about them and see yourself as above the fray. Or if it is that you're a politician, there's a conceit that comes with politicians that they don't ever step back and place themselves in a proper perspective. They see themselves as, puppet masters and controllers of power. The balance really is free, but also have some distance to write about it. And Walter Rodney did it. To a certain degree, Chetty did it. Janet. And the reality is, and I'll say this, it's a bit ironic coming from you. It's because you, to a certain degree, do it. You don't just sit down on a thing. You've gone to protest, you've spoken at rallies, etc. You haven't gone into the executive office or parliament. But there's this duty for me of the public intellectual to be participatory in the things that they comment upon.
But I think you may be simplifying the complex life of Rupert Roopnaraine.
No, I'm saying, I'll put that background, but I'll say that as well. And I wanted to cap it with this. Rupert Roopnaraine did what... Oh, Martin Carter, of course, I can't forget Martin Carter. But Rupert Roopnaraine did it better than anyone else, in that he did the legislature, he did the executive, but at the same time, I remember when he was in Parliament, and in his 60s, mid-60s, he won for his Sky's Wild Noise collected essays. He won he won the Bocas Award. So he did the intellectual thing, and somebody had reminded me the other day that he actually We had the sports thing as well.
But I still think you are simplifying one of the most, with Jagan, Burnham, and a whole set of them, is that because of their longevity in politics, questions began to be asked.
Yeah.
And in the case of Roopnaraine, unlike Jagan and the rest of the leftist generation, there was this thing about assassination of Rodney.
Yeah.
Now, the assassination of Rodney still, it would never go away. I mean, he was too brilliant, and assassination he was too brilliant. He was known globally, and then the assassination now cemented him in the annals of post-colonial heroes. So you talk about Fanon, C.L.R. James, Manley, Mandela, and all of them, and his name comes up. Good. So his name comes up, like all of them who made sacrifices and have died. The thing about the Walter Rodney assassination is the closeness of Rupert Roopnaraine confronted. You said, look, he made peace with his enemies, and that is a quality that should be admired. But it's not making peace with the enemy. It's what you're making peace for, and what you expect your enemy to do with this rapprochement, and also what you expect the generation that you belong to want from this rapprochement. So there are two nuances in Rupert Roopnaraine's life that that have to be confronted intellectually, scholarly, and very, very, very forthrightly.
I agree.
What was his role in that playbook, in those emotions they display? People have expectations of them, that you don't be mourning for your wife and then the next day you're seen with a woman. Good. So he told Dr. Dan Paul Narine in an issue of the West Indian, that's a New York based, November 27. I couldn't testify because I was too close to Rupert. I was too close to Walter. Walter, his death still. But if you're so close to Walter, you couldn't testify because of the emotions in it. How could you have integrated yourself with actors who fingers have been pointed to involvement in the latest edition of Review of African Political Economy, naturally, and as everyone brought it up. So now, what you make peace with people who may have been involved in the assassination of Rodney, but and their demands on the people who belong to that era and suffered in that era and maybe wanted something from those enemies that you made rapprochement with. Now let me give you, and I don't want to talk so much about the rapprochement, but what was Roopnaraine's role? If it is genuinely agreed that the army was involved in the plot to kill Rodney, and I saw at Rupert's funeral, that man turned up. Now, I am one, when you turn up at a funeral for someone, there has to be some connection, however diluted, but of a positive nature. You once know the person even for a week. Now, why would a man who the commissioner inquiry said played a role in the assassination of Rodney turned up at Rupert Roopnaraine's funeral? So the question that keeps swirling around and would not go on, and the article on the Review of African Political Economy is just another one that questions Roopnaraine's role with the people in the 2015 government that may have been.
You're good movie man, but I don't think you're a big series person, like TV show series person. One of the I think it's the most brilliant, one of the most brilliant shows that I've watched is a show called Game of Thrones, and it, in essence, you know, examines these issues of power, duty, betrayal, the individual moral compass versus the greater good. What you consider, how it is that you handle truth, and when you can't. For him, but I have seen enough of already enough of history, and this is from, you know, Rome to Japan to the United States, Europe. I would have gotten a sense that in 2017 he had two choices. Undermine this machinery he was part of, that he felt genuinely.
But he felt like you wasn't going what you want, like how Ruel Johnson felt.
Yeah, so, but saw it as, and at the time, I mean, I left government in 2019, just before him. He left a bit earlier, but he had clocked out. He'd clocked out before. In terms of what he in particular had to say, I don't think anything that he had to say could have been said and be useful in itself, outside of a structured machinery of what the South Africans had, you know, thing. The
Truth and Reconciliation
Reconciliation, right? And there have been similar commissions across the world, right? So I think we had to say would have best been placed there. I mean, that Roopnaraine had perhaps a moral impetus to address those issues, but he served under a president who perhaps had a greater moral impetus, who was in fact part of the machinery, Granger, and who was still part of that core machinery, but who has not addressed those issues. In fact, the Commission of Inquiry was not officially released, although it was turned over.
It was stopped by that president.
It was stopped, and the report was not made public. You had to get leaked reports, right? And the report. So there's always going to be a scale. And I mean, to be fair to him, I wouldn't expect Granger to come and say, this is what happened, although he was, I think, head of military intelligence at the time.
He was head of the army at the time. Military intelligence was the guy who was the minister of the presidency. I can't remember.
Harman.
Joseph Harman.
Yeah, so you had those players in it as well. There's and back to the whole issue with Rodney, the one time thing. I think it's there's nothing beyond that they can do after death, whether it's Rodney or Roopnaraine. I think the real impetus, the real onus has to be the society that they leave behind, that they contribute to, and people like you and me, I guess, but also, you know, historians, public intellectuals, young politicians, to sort of interrogate, I guess, to a certain degree, their family, the people that were closest to get that dialogue going and interrogate whoever has. So, for example, when I saw the article that we referenced in the beginning, you know, I saw the attempt at balance, etc.
I think it did not undermine the overall up to that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
And
John
he,
Gimlet.
Yeah, John Gimlet. And he did say that he had childhood days with Burnham.
Oh yeah, so
And I think Rupert Roopnaraine had days of memories with Burnham, with Granger, and what have you, and it may have driven him. The 5 minutes have 5 minutes is left, so I don't want us to. Let's talk about where do you go from here. You've won the Guyana Prize how many times?
just twice.
Twice, right? Are you writing anything?
Global historiography, in that it takes into account what's going on in the U.S. now. In fact, the title has a title, American Democracy.
Well,
But it plays.
if it takes in Guyana from the 70s, it's going to be more than 300 pages.
Oh yeah, easily. Yeah. So
So you named so many. Jagan didn't write his memoir.
yeah.
Burnham didn't. Hamilton Green doesn't look like he will write it. There's nothing from Roopnaraine except the first part of his book is on his experience in Grenada and how the dictatorship of Burnham, but nothing analytical on the Burnham period, the APNU period.